everyone. Thank you so much for coming to tonight's program on Explore Chicago Collections for Genealogy Research. So our speaker today is Jeannie Long, Executive Director of Chicago Collections Consortium since 2017. Tonight's program will be focused on Explore Chicago Collections, which is a free online search engine and record finding tool where users are able to locate or access over 100,000 maps, photos, and letters.
I thought I'd start with the kind of an overview of what Chicago Collections is, why do we exist, and what our purpose is. So I say way back when, but it is a blink of the eye. In 2012, Chicago Collections was established, and it really became the brainchild of then Dean of Library Services at UIC, Mary Case, and then President of the Newberry Library, David Spatafor. Were working on a citywide initiative on the subject of Chicago mapping. And they thought, how wonderful everyone working together and sharing their collections that way. And let's see, I'm not being able to move ahead here. There we go. I have to press a little bit harder. So this idea of collectively sharing information and the discoverables was great fun for everyone involved. This idea of, I didn't know that was in your archival collection. And on a specific subject, how everything could be interrelated. So Mary Case and David Spatafor talked to other colleagues across the city with this idea. Let's organize ourselves with this topic of just Chicago history and culture. And how can we make that freely and openly accessible, sharing that information on a website. Our commitment and our mission, we examine our mission and our vision with every strategic plan, but we're really committed to that idea of freely, openly, equitably sharing that history and culture of Chicago, but also being able to have that larger conversation of diverse communities as well. I'll share some of our membership. So you'll see now we've grown to over 60 member organizations, which is quite a quite large sampling through some of our partnerships. I'll speak to on the Chicago Cultural Alliance, being able to bring in smaller cultural organizations, which when we talk about the interesting aspects and the strengths of our city is these pockets of neighborhoods as well. Additionally, we're committed to this idea of saving primary resources. Most recently, when Mercy Hospital was closing, they reached out to Chicago Collections saying, all right, now what do we do with our history? How do we preserve our archives that way, since the building no longer will be there? And we're serving as that conduit for the city and for archival collections as well. Additionally, Chicago Collections has a commitment to facilitating scholarship. And by that, I mean helping those researchers, those writers dive in, guiding them to, as I was mentioning, one-stop shopping of Chicago history and culture. You'll see in our search engine what we'll be showing tonight. But also being able to share their information and having public programs where we feature a speaker on the topic of Chicago on a vast majority. We too, like tonight, record our programs. So check out our website at chicagocollections.org under our programs, and on our YouTube channel as well. You can dive in and listen to recordings of some of the authors there. But we're also interested in this idea of, as I was mentioning, you know, the collaboration and building that community. We're all stronger together, we know that, but the story becomes that much richer when these archival collections are being able to share so freely and readily with just a click of a button too. We also like to support member organizations, other initiatives that are happening across the city that aren't members, but we're respectful of, from the Chicago Architecture Biennial So other happenings as well. How can we be a part of that? Here's a listing of our governing members. Really, and our governing members are really kind of the big houses, so to speak, academic houses, museums that helped us formulate our mission, our vision in the early days of laying that out. We have this kind of kaleidoscope of logos of some of our members as well. Everywhere, there's consortiums across the world, but this idea of having Lincoln Park Zoo be in conversation with the Adler Planetarium, being in conversation with the Museum of Contemporary Art, is unique in a city setting that way. So we're very thankful for that. Additionally, all member organizations, part of the membership is to serve on one of our committees. We're a tiny team in terms of staff, but we have over 12 working committees that are comprised of the brain power from these member organizations. So I get to work with, I have the luxury of working with people across the city. Additionally, we have corporate partners who want to share their history. Some of the fascinating archives of the Union League Club of Chicago in terms of the business leaders of the city way back when, starting some of the kind of long-term giving and establishment of art projects and support can be found in the archives of the Union League Club, as well as community enhancement. The Henry Cowan Archive can show us really the construction of Chicago, from the building of the Lyric Opera to the Merchandise Mart and Chicago Cubs. Maybe most recently, some of their history we don't want to look at, some of the losing seasons, but there's some great ones that we certainly remember and want to look at the World Series moments as well. And then, of course, being able to offer this freely and openly without any charge, we can only do that with the support of our generous donors shown here and individual contributors as well. So we're quite pleased on the continual support of these organizations and foundations. But before Chicago Collections, one would have to Google, and then you'd go to a website and you'd start there, then you'd go to another, and then you'd go to another, and you go to another, and then you have to have another winner, and then you keep looking, and you keep looking, and you keep looking. And we wanted the user to have, as I keep referring to, that one conversation, that one glimpse of what they were looking for, what it would show. So when you go to Explore Chicago Collections, and you'll be able to, in our search engine, be able to explore topics, events, monuments, buildings, disasters, all really neatly organized this way. We're supported too by a cooperative reference committee, and it's really, I'll speak to this as well later on, but it's really a virtual reference dense of volunteers, but they field questions from users, frankly, all over the world. And we'll be able to create subject guides and libguides on, all right, people are really interested in Chicago crime. What's going on? What's the history? School protests, things like that. So things are neatly organized and arranged for the user that way. Additionally, people are able to explore just people in general, organizations as well, putting in names and having that pop up, and it gives that listing there, as well as searching metadata records. You'll see neat and tidy to the on the screen here under the libraries and archives. What's, how many digital images are available on that topic of conventions? How many of the images can be found, how many of the sources can be found at Chicago History, University of Illinois, from all our members, and that continues as well. So, and then that complete viewing of looking at images. I always find it fun on Gray Chicago's days, not that we have any of those as of late, but just to be able to get lost in the photos of Explore Chicago Collections. It's a a unique history of being able to see just the changing city, just from recent uploads as well. And again, through that with that over 100,000 images, when you think of just Lake Drive, construction changes there, and Michigan Avenue, and new buildings that have gone up in the last 5, 7, 10 years. Additionally, again, I always consider archivists and librarians are really kind of the Red Cross of the educational world in terms of trying to get that information into the hands of those that need it as easily as possible. So we created this help guide that incorporates search tips, what's the copyright and permissions at member organizations, really being able to plan your trip. When is the Newberry Library open? What are their policies on, can I check out a book? Can I, what are those policies at Chicago Public Library, et cetera. So really that's listed for our member organizations, and that provide that quick and easy access. This is what I was speaking of, this virtual reference desk, Ask at Chicago Collections. You can see the rise in inquiries as Chicago Metro History Day Fair commences, and students from all over the city and will type in some questions looking for information. But as I said, it really ties into some of the inquiries and the continual inquiries and the patterns and trends that we see to the creation of instructional materials as well. But that reference network, as I said, goes out to all these great minds at our member organizations and people responding that. And additionally, because of their participation, they're able to find out, again, that discoverable, I didn't know that was at University of Chicago. I didn't know UIC had this material as well. So we're all learning too. This reference network, again, people are looking to come across, if it's a topic of genealogy, what we'll be diving into tonight, digital image use, donations and appraisals, all those types of questions that are listed there have been addressed. Some of the questions that come in from the general, just to give you an idea, and really kind of how detailed these questions, the responses are. We're quite proud of what our teams are able to respond. When you look at, how can I find information on a building my grandfather owned in the 1940s on Halsted Street? It was a grocery store. Here's the address. So the response dives into kind of two paths to investigate, and really in detail. As I said, the archivist has provided specific information and additional suggestions as well. Looking into Chicago Tribune database, researching small businesses, kind of, having that investigative aspect to where do I begin? How do we start? When I mentioned about our programs, we did one on exploring municipal records and getting, how one can get lost in that tunnel of, where do I get the golden key to find out this information? And the program really brought forth tips and suggestions for the researchers. So if you have the opportunity, I recommend checking that out as well, if you're looking for any citywide records that way. And Office of the City Clerk became a member most recently of Chicago Collections. So back to the topic of genealogy and that research as well. So some of the things, your online search, the genealogy search, if it pulls up when you do that Google, is it Sassy Jane genealogy, has so much, has listed us as a resource as well. But, the general search, but we look, as I said, being able to serve everyone, frankly, across the world. And when we do that, here are some of the interesting things that were noted in that review that see in the interface of diving into a specific aspect of the city is, there's no better tool and resource, again, for Chicago that way as looking at in our Explore Chicago collections that way. Also, this idea of looking at Chicago phone directories and city directories and listing, what member institutions have those available. And some of the things that are the city directories that are posted at Chicago Public Library, but really, again, neat and tidy, providing the user and the researcher ready access and links to that information. We touched upon this in that example, but how do I find out more history about my house and my building? But looking at the City Landmarks Commission, again, diving into the database at the Newberry Library, the Chicago Tribune, what's digitized there of that database. Also looking at Chicago Public Library as well, but these reference sources on real estate transactions and people and advertisements related to the building as well in terms of things were being sold and that type of research. The idea of looking at high school yearbooks and class photos is something that comes in often as well. And some of the links and suggestions are provided here, making it that much easier. So if it's Ancestry Library Edition, Chicago area schools, where to go, the Chicago History Museum, obviously the History Museum, actually our board chair, Ellen Keith, is the director of access, research and access at Chicago History Museum. So a lot of our information is from the Chicago History Museum naturally, but Chicago Public Library as well, sharing that information of yearbooks and what can be found there. So here's a question, I'm working on genealogy and would like to locate records. My relative was a patient at an Illinois State Mental Hospital. And really, what one can do and what's accessible on that topic as based on time periods as well. As stated here, case files, from the 1800s at ISA consist of large registry with a few lines of description and lots, folders full of materials. So it dives into a little bit of that explanation and what people may face, but what to expect as well. And even looking at death release of certificates as well. We had touched upon this when we're talking about our neighborhoods in Chicago and really diving into where people can find information, specifically looking across the city. One of the things most recently we've done with looking into neighborhood association records as well and being able to share that on the Explore portal and also, specific papers and what that shares. On the topic of communities and neighborhoods, most recently, we've created a digital exhibit. I really encourage you to go online and check out our digital exhibits. It's when you talk about communities and neighborhoods, it's a large, broad brushstroke of opportunity for our members to share information on the communities and neighborhoods that they're a part of in terms of their geographical location, but a little bit of the history of what makes them unique in our city. So you'll find some interesting audio and conversation captured in that, but really looking at cultural traditions, common experiences shared across the city, but as I said, from audio, video, photos as well. It gives you that feeling of why our city, frankly, continues to be so special. Another topic and partnership that we entered into pre-pandemic, actually in 2019, was with the Chicago Cultural Alliance. You know, as I shared at the start of the program, our mission and vision, but really is to capture the complete story of Chicago, that complete mosaic piece. And how can we do that, especially having been in conversation with our cultural organizations. So we worked with the Chicago Cultural Alliance on a project with funding from the Illinois Humanities on the topic of immigration and migration to Chicago. How did these specific groups, cultural groups, come to Chicago? Who were those leaders? Where did they land within their city? How did they stay there? How did they move? Those complete stories are shared on the portal, but additionally we've created, and we've done this for all our digital exhibits, curriculum guides that could be used in a classroom setting, but to dive in a little bit deeper on the subject of immigration and migration to Chicago. So as I said, this was quote unquote way back when in 2019, and obviously the topic is even more current today. So I encourage you to check it out. But we're looking forward to continuing the partnership with the Cultural Alliance and bringing on more groups. What's important for Chicago Collections is being able to have that hand in helping these organizations preserve their history, but also back to that idea, their history will now be in conversation with the larger institutions, so that researcher, that user can have that bigger understanding of a specific topic through the cross-sharing of collections. Another genealogy aspect we had touched upon, looking at medical archives, and Rush University Northwestern Medical Archives are members of Chicago Collections, but it's interesting to find out that Rush University Medical Center was incorporated 2 days before the city of Chicago, and what their unique history, and looking back, if it's the educational records of doctors, and the archivist there gets continual genealogy questions on that, if it's someone who's researching a parent or a grandfather who went to school there or went to nursing school, but being able to share the personal papers of individuals as related to the institutions on the health professions that way. Other topics, and as I said, those of you who are well experienced in genealogy research and have attended other events too, we like to host programs in partnership with Chicago Public Libraries as well. And one of the groups we brought on was the International Society of Sons and Daughters of Slave Ancestry, which provides a unique opportunity to dive in that much deeper and connect the genealogy roots and dots to finding ancestors that way. But there's a lot of resources there as well. Loyola University, one of our founding members, their Women in Leadership Archives is so robust and so rich. And if you haven't had the opportunity to dive into it, check their archives out. They always welcome visitors, and also have a great programming schedule as well for the general public. But it's a great capture also of a certain time period in Chicago. So if you can't find your own specific genealogy family member, but you get a better feeling for the time of our city by looking at some of the personal papers there. Also, and many of you know this, in the search of treasures of archives, but looking at the congregation of Senecal, Our Lady of the Senecal Archives, and diving into the religious front, and how to find out that much more of, of religious connections that way to family members as well. But it's a huge resource, and archives as well. I hope many of you are familiar with the Frances Willard House Museum and Archives. And again, talking about women's history and leadership, but it really gives you the snapshot in time of that specific time period of women suffragettes in the city, and what was going on in Evanston at that time as a city, and huge information, and very generous with the sharing as well. But it's a wonderful trip to visit the House Museum, and their archivists are always very generous with their time, and I'm sure you'll find a tour really worthwhile. Some of our information, we ask you, as I had mentioned, to check us out on our homepage, check us out at, Explore Chicago Collections as well. And I know this was a quick overview and brushstroke of certain topics as well, but it's really a teaser for all of you to just dive into the Explore portal, get lost in it. Hopefully that will spark more questions, which I encourage you to reach out. All our information, contact information is on our website. So you can say, I can't find this, I can see this. Have you ever thought about doing this? We welcome your suggestions on that topics.